Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You wake up one morning and look in the mirror, but instead of seeing yourself, you see a collage of faces: your parents' expectations, your friends' approval, your boss's praise, your partner's smile. Layer after layer of other people's desires have been painted over your own reflection. And somewhere beneath all of it, your true face, the one you were born with, the one that holds your authentic identity, has grown faint, blurred, almost unrecognizable. Now ask yourself, whose life have you really been living? From childhood, you were taught explicitly or silently that love is conditional. Approval became the currency of belonging, a gold star for being quiet in class, a pat on the head for saying the right thing, a smile from your parents when you sacrificed your own needs to meet theirs. Slowly, without realizing it, you began to stitch your worth out of other people's reactions. And yet, here lies the paradox. The more you strive to please others, the less they actually see you. They see only the mask you've created for their comfort. They see the performance, not the person. You become like an actor trapped in a role that never ends, applauded for lines you never wrote, imprisoned in a play that was never your choice. But here's the haunting question. If everyone admires the character you're pretending to be, but no one knows who you truly are, do you really exist in their eyes? This is where the quiet tragedy begins. Because pleasing others feels like connection, but in reality, it is the slowest form of erasure. Every yes you force when your heart is screaming no is not just a concession, it is a small burial of the self. Every time you twist your words to avoid disapproval, you silence your own voice a little more. Every time you contort yourself to fit into someone else's vision, you shrink the space where your soul can breathe. And still, the urge persists. Why? Because validation tastes sweet in the moment. It's a sugar rush of acceptance, a fleeting comfort that disguises the deeper hunger within. You start to believe that harmony with others is worth the cost of abandoning yourself. You tell yourself, if they're happy with me, maybe I'll finally be enough. But what happens when the applause stops? What happens when their approval shifts? When their needs change? When their eyes turn elsewhere? Who are you then? Do you still exist? The great contradiction of people-pleasing is this. You seek love but sacrifice authenticity. You crave belonging but surrender individuality. You long for recognition but disappear in the process. So let us step into the silence of that contradiction. Imagine sitting in a crowded room, smiling at all the right moments, nodding when expected, agreeing with words that taste like ash in your mouth. Everyone thinks they know you, yet you feel more invisible than ever. They love the mask, but no one has touched the raw, untamed skin beneath it. Now ask yourself, what is more terrifying, the possibility of being disliked for who you truly are, or the certainty of being loved for someone you're not? This is the prison of pleasing others. The walls are not made of stone, but of invisible threads, threads woven from fear, guilt, obligation, and the fragile hope that compliance will buy love. You can walk out at any time, and yet you don't, because the fear of rejection feels heavier than the weight of self-abandonment. But here is the deeper wound. Each act of self-betrayal leaves an echo. You hear it in the late-night questions you cannot silence. Why am I so tired? Why do I feel so unseen? Why do I have everything others wanted for me, yet nothing that feels like mine? And if you listen closely, beneath those questions, another voice emerges, the faint whisper of your buried identity, asking, when will you choose me? So the great question becomes this: if pleasing others slowly destroys your identity, what would it mean to finally stop? To let the mask crack, to risk rejection, to stand in the raw light of your own truth unadorned, unapproved, but real. Would you still belong? Would you still be loved? Or would you, for the first time, discover something greater than validation, something that feels like freedom? Because when you dare to stop pleasing others, everything changes. And that is where our journey begins. The danger of pleasing others does not begin in adulthood. It begins in the earliest moments of life, before you even had words to name what you were doing. As a child, you were not just seeking food, shelter, or comfort. You were seeking something deeper, the gaze of recognition. You longed for someone to look at you and say, through action or expression, I see you, you matter. You are enough as you are. But here's the painful truth: that gaze was never unconditional. Even the most loving parents, teachers, or caretakers had rules spoken or unspoken for when you were acceptable and when you were not. Cry too much, and you were scolded. Be too quiet, and you were questioned. Want too much, and you were told you were selfish. In those early years, your nervous system learns something critical. Survival often depends on adaptation, not authenticity. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what he didn't say is how rare that privilege really is, because the journey of identity begins with distortion. As children, we adapt to survive, and in that adaptation, we lose pieces of ourselves. This is the hidden root of people-pleasing. You were trained to equate love with performance. Approval became a substitute for worth, and so you learned to wear masks long before you even realized they were masks. Nietzsche called this tendency slave morality, the instinct to bend, to comply, to seek the favor of the powerful, while silencing your own instinct for self-assertion. He saw it as the death of vitality, the burial of the human spirit under the weight of social conformity. And when you examine people-pleasing through his lens, it becomes clear: it is not kindness. It is a slow obedience to invisible masters, a quiet betrayal of the will to live authentically. But psychology offers an even sharper lens. In the 20th century, attachment theory revealed that a child will always choose connection over authenticity. If the cost of being real is abandonment, the child will sacrifice reality to avoid loneliness. Think about that. Your deepest instincts were not about truth, but about survival. And survival demanded that you twist yourself into what others wanted. Over time, this survival strategy calcifies into identity. You start to believe, I am only lovable when I'm useful. I am only valuable when I'm agreeable. I am only safe when I erase my needs for others. This is not just behavior, it is conditioning written into your nervous system. But here's where philosophy deepens the wound. Sartre once argued that hell is not fire and brimstone, but the gaze of the other. To exist always under someone else's watchful eye is to lose your own freedom. And isn't that what happens when you live to please others? You live as if constantly watched, constantly judged, constantly shaped into a reflection that is not your own. And yet, paradoxically, this hidden problem feels virtuous. Society praises the people-pleaser. You are called selfless, kind, generous, dependable. You are the friend who never says no, the partner who always compromises, the employee who always delivers. On the surface, these qualities are admired, but beneath them lies a silent erosion. What looks like selflessness is often self-erasure. The philosopher Schopenhauer warned of this very thing. He believed that most people live not according to their will, but according to the will of others, enslaved by the endless chase for recognition. And he asked the haunting question, if your actions are always dictated by what others expect, are you truly alive, or are you merely an instrument for someone else's song? This is why the hidden problem of people-pleasing is so difficult to confront. It disguises itself as goodness. It cloaks itself in morality, kindness, and love. And yet, at its root, it is not about love at all. It is about fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of abandonment. Fear of standing in the raw, unapproved light of your own truth. And this fear grows because the world itself conspires to maintain it. Modern culture rewards compliance. Corporations thrive on workers who sacrifice their well-being for performance. Families often prefer the obedient child to the honest one. Even friendships can become dependent on one person's willingness to silence themselves for harmony. Everywhere you look, the world teaches you, do not disturb the peace, even if that peace requires your silence. But here's the philosophical contradiction. Peace built on silence is not peace, is suppression. Harmony achieved through self-erasure is not harmony, it is control. And so you live in a constant tension between two forces, the instinct to survive through belonging, and the instinct to live through authenticity. One tells you, please them, and you will be safe. The other whispers, be yourself, and you will be free. But the tragedy is that you cannot serve both. Each yes to others can become a no to yourself, and the more you repeat that pattern, the more the self withers. This is the psychological and philosophical root of why pleasing others slowly destroys your identity. It begins as survival, transforms into conditioning, and eventually masquerades as morality. But beneath all its disguises, it is still the same wound. The inability to believe that who you are without masks, without performance, without approval is enough. So now we stand at a threshold. If this is the root, then what are the consequences? What happens to the human spirit that spends its life pleasing others? How does it manifest in relationships, careers, and society at large? The answers, as we will see, are far more devastating than most ever realize. The true tragedy of people-pleasing is not found in the small daily sacrifices you make. It is found in the slow erosion of your very being. The consequences creep in silently, often disguised as harmless compromises, but over time they fracture your soul in ways you don't immediately notice. At first, it feels innocent. You say yes to a favor, even though you're exhausted. You swallow a disagreement, even though your heart burns with truth. You bend, you adjust, you mold yourself into what others need, and the world applauds you for it. You are praised as reliable, compassionate, easygoing. But inside, something fragile begins to wither. Imagine a sculptor chiseling away at a marble statue, but instead of creating art, every strike of the hammer removes a piece of who you are. That is what people-pleasing does. Each yes chips away at your identity, and because the process is so gradual, you don't realize until years later that the shape staring back at you is no longer yours. One of the most devastating consequences is the loss of self-trust. Every time you betray your own needs to satisfy another, you teach yourself a dangerous lesson. My voice cannot be trusted. My feelings are negotiable. My instincts are disposable. Over time, this erodes your inner compass. You no longer know what you want, what you believe, or even who you are. And without self-trust, life feels like wandering through fog. You can move, but you cannot truly see. Relationships, too, become poisoned by this hidden pattern. On the surface, people may admire your willingness to give, but relationships built on self-erasure are fragile because they are not based on authenticity. You present a version of yourself that exists only to maintain peace, not to reveal truth. And here lies the paradox. In trying to hold on to love by pleasing others, you end up creating a connection that is not real. You are loved not for who you are, but for who you pretend to be. And sooner or later, resentment grows. You begin to feel invisible, unappreciated, misunderstood. You tell yourself, I give so much, yet no one gives back to me. But how can they? If you never show your true needs, how can anyone meet them? If you never risk honesty, how can anyone truly know you? On a deeper level, people-pleasing shapes the very architecture of your brain. Neuroscience shows that repeated behaviors strengthen neural pathways. The more you suppress your voice, the more automatic suppression becomes. People-pleasing is not just a habit, it rewires your nervous system to equate compliance with safety. Eventually, even the thought of saying no creates anxiety, while the act of self-betrayal feels comforting. Your brain mistakes captivity for peace. This has wider consequences for society as well. A culture of people-pleasers creates workplaces where burnout is glorified, families where silence replaces honesty, and communities where injustice thrives because no one dares to speak. History is full of moments where silence enabled cruelty. As Nietzsche warned, he who does not have the courage to contradict will ultimately be governed by the mediocre. But perhaps the most haunting consequence is existential, the quiet death of authenticity. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, once said that life's ultimate task is to find meaning, to live in alignment with what gives your existence purpose. Yet how can you find meaning if your entire life is orchestrated by the expectations of others? You may live for decades, but never truly live as yourself. You may breathe, eat, work, laugh, but always as a shadow of your own being. And this shadow life carries another hidden danger: burnout of the soul. Not just the exhaustion of the body, but the fatigue of constantly wearing masks. Each interaction becomes theater, each word rehearsed, each smile a performance. Over time, you forget the difference between performance and reality. And when the mask finally cracks, when you can no longer maintain the charade, you are left with the terrifying question, who am I without their approval? This is why so many midlife crises are not about money, career, or status. They are about identity. People wake up one morning and realize they have built a life that does not belong to them. The career was chosen to impress parents. The marriage was sustained to avoid loneliness. The friendships were maintained through silence. And beneath it all lies an emptiness that no amount of external validation can fill. Even your health is not spared. Chronic people-pleasing is linked to anxiety, depression, and stress-related illness. The body keeps score of every swallowed truth, every unspoken need, every suppressed emotion. What the tongue does not say, the body eventually will. Ulcers, headaches, insomnia, these are not random. They are the language of a body carrying the weight of inauthentic living. And so the cycle deepens. You give more to avoid rejection. You erase more to avoid conflict. You perform more to be loved. And yet, the more you please, the more you disappear. Can you see the cruel paradox? The very strategy you use to gain acceptance ends up making you invisible. The very method you use to hold on to love ensures you are never truly loved. The very instinct you use to protect yourself ultimately destroys the self you are trying to protect. This is why people-pleasing is not just a bad habit, it is a spiritual wound. It is the theft of authenticity, the quiet suffocation of identity, the slow death of the soul, and once you see this truth, you cannot unsee it. You begin to wonder, if this is the cost of pleasing others, then what is the alternative? Is there a way to live without masks, without fear, without constant self-betrayal? The answer, though painful, is yes. But it requires something radical. Rebellion, to break free from the prison of people-pleasing, is not a gentle adjustment, is a rebellion. It is not about slowly tweaking the script you've been following. It is about tearing it up, throwing it into the fire, and daring to write your own story from the ashes. At first, this rebellion feels unnatural. After all, you have lived as a shapeshifter for so long that conformity feels like home. Saying yes is reflex. Apologizing for existing is second nature. To suddenly stand firm in your truth feels dangerous. Your nervous system screams. That rejection is coming, that abandonment is near. And in a sense, it's right. Because rebellion will cost you. But here is the paradox. The price of freedom is always less than the cost of captivity. The first step of rebellion is silence, not the silence of submission, but the silence of listening. For years, you have drowned out your own voice beneath the noise of others' demands. Now, you must sit in stillness long enough to hear the faint whisper of your true self. This is not easy. At first, the silence feels unbearable, as if you are withdrawing from an addiction. But slowly, fragments of your own desires begin to surface. You hear yourself say, "I don't want this, I long for that. This matters to me, that does not." These are not selfish statements, they are survival statements. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." To begin that journey, you must endure the discomfort of authenticity. It means risking disapproval. It means saying no and watching people frown. It means telling the truth and facing the silence that follows. Authenticity is not free, demands courage, but courage grows with practice. The first time you say no when every part of you wants to say yes, your body trembles. The guilt feels unbearable. You fear you have shattered everything, but then the world does not collapse. The sun still rises. And in that small survival, something powerful happens. You realize you are stronger than you thought. Each act of self-respect becomes a brick in the foundation of your new identity. This rebellion also requires reframing what love and connection really mean. True love is not built on sacrifice of the self, is built on revelation of the self. To be loved for your mask is not love, it is validation. To be loved for your truth, that is intimacy. When you stop pleasing, yes, some relationships will fall away. Those who only valued your compliance will drift. But what remains, and what forms after, will be built on something real. There is another dimension to this rebellion, reclaiming. Anger. Society teaches people-pleasers that anger is dangerous, selfish, destructive. And yes, anger can be destructive if left unchecked. But at its core, anger is a signal. It reveals where your boundaries have been crossed. To suppress anger is to silence your inner guardian. Rebellion means allowing yourself to feel that fire, not to burn others, but to illuminate where you have abandoned yourself. Anger becomes a compass pointing to your hidden needs. Consider this. Every revolution in history began with the recognition of injustice. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, the struggles for civil rights, they were born not from politeness, but from a refusal to tolerate what was intolerable. Your inner rebellion is no different. You must reach a point where you whisper to yourself, I will not betray myself anymore. I will not live in chains to their approval. Of course, rebellion is lonely at first. You may feel as though you are walking away from the crowd into a wilderness where no one follows. But in that wilderness, you begin to discover the companions who are meant for your true self. They may be fewer, but they are deeper. You trade quantity for quality, noise for resonance, validation for love. There is also a strange beauty in the rejection that comes with rebellion. Each person who leaves because you dared to be yourself was never truly yours to begin with. Their absence is not a loss, it is a clearing. It makes space for those who can meet you in truth. Rebellion, then, is not only about external exit, it is about internal allegiance. Every day you choose whom you will serve, the expectations of others or the truth of your own soul. Each choice is a battlefield, small but significant, and with each victory your sense of identity grows stronger. Nietzsche once wrote, "Become who you are." That is the essence of rebellion. It is not about becoming someone new, it is about returning to the person you always were beneath the layers of compliance and fear. And when you begin to live this way, you discover something shocking. People respect you more. The very boundaries you feared would drive people away become the pillars of your dignity. You walk differently. You speak with weight. You no longer beg for respect, you embody it, and others can feel it. But the rebellion must be sustained. Old habits of self-betrayal are seductive. Guilt will come knocking. Doubt will whisper. Fear will tempt you to put the mask back on. In those moments, you must remember, captivity may feel safe, but it is suffocating. Freedom may feel terrifying, but it is the only path worth walking. And so you choose, again and again, to live as yourself, not as an echo, not as a shadow, not as a puppet of other people's desires, but as a living, breathing soul with boundaries, with truth, with self-respect. This is the rebellion. This is how you break free in the end. The rebellion leads you here to a deeper realization that surpasses all the noise, all the fear, all the masks you once wore. The ultimate truth is this: pleasing others is not love, and abandoning yourself is not kindness. You are not born to be a reflection in someone else's mirror. You are not born to live as a shadow of expectations, a puppet dancing for approval, a hollow vessel filled with everyone else's desires but your own. You are born to stand as an unrepeatable, irreplaceable self-an expression of existence that the universe will never again replicate. To betray that is to betray life itself, and yet, for years, perhaps decades, you did betray it. You thought love meant self-erasure. You thought peace meant silence. You thought belonging meant blending in until you disappeared. But here is the truth that shakes you awake. Any connection built on your absence is not real connection. It is an illusion. Viktor Frankl, who endured the unimaginable suffering of concentration camps, wrote that life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. People-pleasing is precisely this, a slow strangulation of meaning. It strips your existence of purpose by turning your every action into someone else's script. And so the unbearable weight of emptiness grows. But the moment you reclaim yourself, everything shifts. You realize that meaning was never out there. not in the smiles you earned, not in the approval you collected, not in the applause that echoed. Meaning has always been born within your truth, your boundaries, your desires, your voice. This is the paradox you finally see clearly. Pleasing others gave you temporary acceptance, but permanent emptiness. Honoring yourself gives you temporary rejection, but permanent wholeness. And only one of those paths leads to life. The ultimate truth is not that you must reject people, is that you must refuse to reject yourself. When you live in self-respect, relationships become sacred exchanges, not desperate transactions. Love becomes recognition, not performance. Respect becomes mutual, not begged for. You no longer orbit around others. You stand as your own center, and those who truly resonate with you are drawn into your orbit naturally. Think of the stars. None of them begs to shine. None of them dims their light to keep the sky comfortable. Each burns with its own intensity, and in doing so, creates constellations, galaxies, worlds. You are no different. When you shine as yourself, without apology, you draw the right people, the right opportunities, the right meaning into your life. The final freedom is not the power. To say no to others is the power to say yes to yourself. A yes that is not conditioned by fear. A yes that is not chained to approval. A yes that echoes from the deepest chamber of your soul. A yes that says, "This is my life, this is my truth, this is who I am, and I will not trade it for applause." And here is something even more profound. When you stop betraying yourself, you give others permission to stop betraying themselves too. Your authenticity becomes contagious. Your self-respect becomes a mirror in which others see the possibility of their own. You are no longer just living, you are liberating. Imagine a world where everyone stopped living for approval, where children grew without the crushing weight of impossible expectations, where partners loved each other not for compliance but for truth, where leaders led not by manipulation but by integrity. That world begins with one choice, your choice to stop living as a pleaser and start living as yourself. This is the ultimate truth. Identity is not found in being everything to everyone. It is found in being wholly yourself, even if that self is not loved by all. Yes, there will be loss. Yes, there will be pain. But what you gain is beyond measure. You gain self-trust, which no one can take from you. You gain clarity, which cuts through manipulation. You gain dignity, which shines brighter than applause. And most importantly, you gain the quiet, steady joy of finally being at home in your own skin. As Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. You cannot change the years you spent pleasing, the pieces of yourself you abandoned, the opportunities you lost. But you can choose now. You can choose to live free, to write a new script, to take the fragments of your old self and forge them into something whole. The question is no longer, will they, like me, will they stay? Will they approve? The question becomes, am I living as myself? Am I honoring my truth? Am I respecting the one life I've been given? And if the answer is yes, then you have already won. Because in the end, self-respect is not about arrogance. It is not about isolation. It is not about superiority. It is about alignment, about living so fully in your own truth that you can finally look in the mirror without flinching. Finally walk through the world without apology. Finally rest at night knowing you did not betray yourself for the fleeting comfort of someone else's smile. That is the ultimate truth. That is freedom. That is identity reclaimed.